The air inside the sold-out arena was electric, a pulsing, living thing fueled by anticipation, disbelief, and sheer curiosity. The fight the world never thought would happen was about to begin. On one side of the octagon stood Conor McGregor, a man who had spent his life fighting his way to the top, built from blood, sweat, and the sheer force of his will. Across from him, in a reality that seemed too absurd to be true, stood Mark Zuckerberg, the billionaire tech mogul, the architect of the digital age, and now, somehow, the man who had willingly stepped into the cage against one of the most dangerous fighters in history. No one knew exactly how it had come to this. The rumors had started as a joke, a light-hearted exchange on social media, a playful challenge between the world's most famous fighter and the face of Facebook. But jokes had a way of taking on a life of their own when billions of people were watching. The internet had turned it into a wildfire, and what began as speculation quickly transformed into something real. Zuckerberg, a man who spent his days shaping the future of the virtual world, had taken up Brazilian jiu-jitsu, quietly training in the background while the world dismissed him as a soft billionaire with no place in a fight. But those who paid closer attention saw something different. They saw obsession. They saw a man who, for all his wealth and power, was still searching for something more. McGregor didn't care about any of that. To him, this was just another fight, another name to add to his legacy, another spectacle that would prove once again why he was the greatest showman combat sports had ever seen. He had fought the best, taken on the toughest, walked through wars inside the cage. Zuckerberg? He was just another rich man playing dress-up, another celebrity convinced that money could buy him the ability to survive inside the octagon. It wasn't enough to beat him. McGregor had to make a statement. The crowd erupted as both fighters stepped forward for the final instructions. McGregor, loose and confident, rolled his shoulders, eyes locked onto his opponent with a smirk that barely concealed his amusement. Zuckerberg stood still, his expression unreadable, his posture eerily calm. He had trained, sure. He had spent months preparing for this moment. But none of that mattered now. Because training in a gym and stepping into the cage with Conor McGregor were two entirely different things. The referee gave the final commands and stepped back. The cage door slammed shut. The moment had arrived. The billionaire and the fighter. The digital king and the warrior. The bell rang. McGregor exploded forward, a blur of motion, ready to end the fight before Zuckerberg could even process what was happening. His left hand twitched, a feint to set up the right. He could already see it in his mind, Zuckerberg flinching, reacting too slow, the right hook landing clean and sending him crumbling to the mat. But then something happened that McGregor hadn't expected. Zuckerberg moved. Not clumsily, not awkwardly, but with precision. He didn't panic. He didn't flinch. Instead, he sidestepped, his body shifting just enough to make McGregor's opening attack miss by inches. It was the smallest of movements, but it spoke volumes. This wasn't a man who had stepped into the cage unprepared. McGregor adjusted immediately, launching a sharp leg kick, aiming to break Zuckerberg's balance before he could settle into any kind of rhythm. But again, the billionaire reacted faster than expected, his stance shifting, absorbing the impact with an ease that sent the first ripple of doubt through the air. The crowd had expected a slaughter. They had expected McGregor to walk through his opponent like he had so many others. But now, as Zuckerberg circled with unsettling composure, the mood shifted. The fight wasn't over in the opening seconds. And that was something no one had prepared for. McGregor smirked, rolling his neck, reassessing. Maybe this wouldn't be over in a single punch. Maybe Zuckerberg had more fight in him than expected. That was fine. It just meant McGregor would take his time breaking him down. Zuckerberg, for his part, remained silent. He hadn't said a word during the build-up, hadn't engaged in the usual theatrics that surrounded a McGregor fight. He had simply trained, prepared, and now, standing across from one of the most dangerous men on the planet, he was showing no fear. McGregor feinted again, testing, watching. Zuckerberg reacted, but not in the way most unseasoned fighters did. He didn't lunge, didn't overcommit. He simply watched back, his eyes studying, calculating. McGregor had seen this look before, but not from fighters. From strategists. From men who thought 10 steps ahead. The first real exchange came fast, McGregor launching a lightning-fast combination, fists flying, testing Zuckerberg's reflexes, his instincts, his ability to survive in the chaos of a real fight. The crowd surged as Zuckerberg defended, moving, blocking, absorbing. He wasn't fighting back, not yet, but he was still standing. And that was when McGregor felt it, the unmistakable shift in energy. Zuckerberg wasn't here to win the way people expected. He wasn't here to brawl. He wasn't trying to beat McGregor in his own game. He was playing a different one entirely. McGregor grinned. "All right then, let's see what you got." But deep down, something gnawed at him. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what kind of fight he had just stepped into. McGregor had been in strange fights before, but this was something different. The more he pressed forward, the more Zuckerberg seemed to evade in ways that didn't make sense. His movements weren't just defensive, they were calculated, almost predictive, as if he knew what was coming before it happened. The crowd's energy shifted from excitement to confusion, and McGregor himself felt a flicker of something he rarely experienced inside the octagon: curiosity. The billionaire still hadn't thrown a single strike. That alone was enough to put McGregor on edge. He had faced aggressive brawlers, skilled counterstrikers, elite grapplers, but never someone like this. Zuckerberg was playing a game that wasn't about brute force. It was about control, about waiting for the exact moment when McGregor would overcommit. And McGregor wasn't sure whether to be amused or irritated by it. The announcers scrambled to make sense of what they were witnessing. The world had expected a spectacle, but not like this. McGregor had walked in expecting to put Zuckerberg away in seconds, but now the fight had taken a strange turn. It wasn't just that Zuckerberg was surviving. It was the way he moved, the way he watched, as if this wasn't just a fight for him, it was a test, an experiment unfolding in real time. Somewhere in the sea of flashing cameras and roaring fans, those watching closely could see a subtle exchange happening beyond fists and footwork. Zuckerberg wasn't fighting like a man defending himself. He was studying, learning, absorbing. And McGregor, despite his dominance in combat, felt something pressing in on the edges of his instincts. Then, finally, Zuckerberg struck. It wasn't powerful. It wasn't fast. But it was precise. A sharp, calculated front kick not meant to hurt, just to create space, to disrupt McGregor's rhythm. It caught him in the midsection, forcing him to take a half step back, and for the first time, the Irishman realized what was happening. Zuckerberg wasn't just playing defense. He was building data. McGregor's mind snapped into focus. This wasn't just about training. Zuckerberg had built empires on information, on algorithms, on predicting human behavior. And now, inside this cage, he was doing the same thing. He was treating this fight like a system, calculating patterns, absorbing every movement, adjusting in real time. McGregor grinned, wiping his mouth with the back of his glove. "All right, nerd. You want to play mind games?" His tone was playful, but there was a sharp edge to it now. He knew when someone was underestimating him, and he knew when someone was trying to control a fight without throwing a real punch. That wasn't going to fly. McGregor surged forward again, this time not just attacking, but disrupting. He faked high, swept low, shifted angles, changed speeds, every trick he had learned in his years of fighting. But Zuckerberg adapted, reacting faster than before, his movements becoming eerily efficient. The smirk on McGregor's face faltered for a fraction of a second. This fight wasn't just physical. It was something else entirely. And somewhere deep in his gut, McGregor knew he was up against something he didn't fully understand yet. A sharp feint, a sudden pivot, and McGregor launched a crushing left hand. It was the same shot that had dropped world champions, the one that built his empire. But just before impact, Zuckerberg slipped to the side with unsettling precision, the punch whistling past his ear by mere inches. The crowd gasped not because of what McGregor had done, but because of what Zuckerberg had just avoided. He hadn't just dodged the strike. He had read it. McGregor felt the heat rising in his chest, a mix of excitement and irritation. He had stepped into this cage expecting a one-sided showcase, but this was turning into something else. Zuckerberg wasn't winning, not yet, but he wasn't losing either. He was still standing, still calculating, still adjusting like a machine fine-tuning itself with each second. Then, out of nowhere, Zuckerberg struck again. A sudden shift, a sharp step in, and he clinched, wrapping his arms around McGregor's torso in a grip that felt far stronger than expected. The Irishman reacted instantly, fighting for underhooks, but Zuckerberg had leverage, pressing him against the cage. The crowd erupted. For the first time, McGregor felt Zuckerberg's strength, not raw power, not brute force, but something controlled, methodical. His grip wasn't desperate. It was deliberate. And then McGregor realized something else. Zuckerberg wasn't just grappling, he was stalling, slowing the fight, forcing McGregor into his pace. With a sharp burst of energy, McGregor ripped himself free, shoving Zuckerberg back into open space. His breathing was steady, but inside, his mind raced. He had underestimated his opponent. The billionaire was no warrior, but he was something else, something dangerous in his own way. Then, a new realization hit him. Zuckerberg had spent his entire life building networks, controlling the flow of information, manipulating data with an almost supernatural level of precision. And now, in this cage, he was doing the same thing, not with computers, but with McGregor himself. The fight wasn't about who was stronger or faster. It was about control. McGregor smirked, but this time it wasn't the cocky grin of a man toying with an opponent. It was something sharper, something calculating. If Zuckerberg wanted to turn this into a game of strategy, fine. But he was about to find out that McGregor could play that game too. Then, without warning, the Irishman took a step back. A small, deliberate retreat. Zuckerberg's eyes flickered with recognition, his weight shifting ever so slightly forward. He was analyzing, predicting, waiting for McGregor to move first. And that's when McGregor struck. A sudden burst of speed. A perfectly timed left hook, but not to the head. To the ribs. The impact was sharp, digging deep, forcing Zuckerberg to stumble back. For the first time, the mask of calm slipped for just a second. McGregor saw it. He had cracked the code. Zuckerberg was processing, recalibrating. But now, McGregor wasn't going to let him catch up. He pressed forward, throwing feints, making Zuckerberg react before he had time to analyze. The tech mogul was still dangerous, still thinking, but the fight had shifted. And as McGregor closed the distance again, he knew one thing for certain. A deep breath, a shift in weight, and McGregor closed in with deadly intent. His feints were sharper now, his angles unpredictable, forcing Zuckerberg into a reactionary state. The billionaire was still calculating, still adjusting, but McGregor wasn't giving him time to process. This was what he lived for, the chaos, the raw instinct, the moment where fighting stopped being a game of strategy and became something primal. Then, just when McGregor saw the opening he had been waiting for, Zuckerberg did something unexpected. He didn't retreat. He didn't dodge. Instead, he stepped into the strike, absorbing the glancing blow to his shoulder and countering with a perfectly timed trip. It wasn't powerful, but it was executed with mechanical precision, and for the briefest second, McGregor felt his balance shift. He caught himself before he hit the ground, rolling to his feet with practiced ease, but the realization hit him like a second punch. Zuckerberg had been playing him the whole time. He hadn't just been analyzing. He had been baiting, subtly leading McGregor into predictable patterns while hiding his own intentions. McGregor wiped his mouth, eyes locked onto Zuckerberg, and let out a low chuckle. "All right, you sneaky little genius. Let's finish this." The crowd roared as McGregor launched into a final, unrelenting assault. He cut angles, threw sharp combinations, mixing high and low strikes with a speed that even Zuckerberg's calculations couldn't fully keep up with. the billionaire's defenses began to falter. His evasions weren't as crisp, his reactions a fraction slower. Then, McGregor saw it, the moment where Zuckerberg's patterns broke, the moment when his machine-like precision finally cracked under the weight of pure, unrelenting aggression. A perfectly timed left hand crashed against Zuckerberg's jaw, sending him stumbling backward. His legs wobbled. His hands dropped just enough for McGregor to move in for the finish. A follow-up uppercut, clean and devastating, snapped Zuckerberg's head back. The crowd erupted as he collapsed onto the mat, his body going limp just long enough for the referee to dive in and stop the fight. McGregor raised his fists, breathing hard, adrenaline still surging through his veins. But instead of celebrating, he stepped forward, extending a hand toward Zuckerberg, who was already trying to sit up. There was no mockery in McGregor's expression, no arrogance, just respect. Zuckerberg looked up at him, eyes still dazed, but filled with something else. Understanding. He took McGregor's hand and pulled himself to his feet. The arena was deafening, the world watching in shock, but between the two men, there was only one unspoken truth: this had never been just a fight. It had been a test, a battle between instinct and intellect, between raw human chaos and calculated precision. McGregor leaned in, just enough for Zuckerberg to hear. Not bad, for a billionaire. Zuckerberg smirked, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. Not bad, for a fighter. And as the cameras flashed, capturing the moment that no one had seen coming, one thought lingered in the air between them. What if this wasn't the last time they faced off?